For more on the conflict in the Middle East, we can speak to Laura Blumenfeld, Senior Fellow at the Philip Merrill Center for Strategic Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Laura, great to see you again. I just want to start with the fact that, of course, we've just seen this report about horrific injuries in Gaza, and we've heard this report also coming out from the UNHCR today about the percentage of casualties over a 6-month period in Gaza being 70% women and children. I mean, it seems at this point that there doesn't seem to be a prospect for the fighting actually to end.
Well, I think that the report does help put pressure on Israel to meet the demands. There's a deadline next week, next Wednesday, November 13th, for Israel to address the humanitarian crisis, or the U.S. could potentially suspend military assistance, which we all understand now. Israel is heavily dependent on the U.S. for weapons, never more so than today. They're not hitting their targets for humanitarian aid. They did announce today that they're opening up a new crossing, so hopefully that's the beginning, and that those targets of 350 truckloads of assistance will start flowing, again, hopefully as soon as next Wednesday.
Laura, I spoke to another analyst about this last week, about the pressure that the U.S. is putting to meet this 30-day deadline. As you said, that would fall next week. And he said he doesn't think the Israelis actually believe that the U.S. would withhold military aid. Do you think that's the case?
Well, even if Netanyahu isn't afraid of President Biden, he is afraid of President-elect Donald Trump. And it's clear that President Trump wants to, become, as he describes himself, the self-described president of peace. He was on the phone today, or he spoke to Amos Hochstein, the special envoy for Lebanon, saying, make a deal. That's kind of his language for a peace, a ceasefire with Lebanon and Hezbollah. And he spoke to Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority leader. So he clearly has what he would call skin in the game to end this crisis, to end the war. And I do think Netanyahu is going to pay attention to that, if not to President Biden.
Why is it that Donald Trump might be able to do something that has eluded Joe Biden?
Well, I think that he kind of, President Biden spoke softly and carried a big aircraft carrier. I think that President Trump speaks a different language. He's all about success. He actually is singing from the same song sheet as Prime Minister Netanyahu, which is echoing Ronald Reagan, which is peace through strength. And there's something about that muscular attitude that you see leaders around the world kind of snapping to attention. It's been quite remarkable how people who are his foes, whether it's China or Russia or even Iran, I think there's been quite a bit of groveling out there. And I just don't think Netanyahu is going to want to piss him off, if I'm allowed to use that language on international television.
Meanwhile, we have actually seen that the U.S. has revealed that Qatar has asked Hamas representatives to leave Doha after rejecting the latest ceasefire agreement. What do you think that tells us?
I think it tells us that this period from election day to inauguration day, everyone might finally do what they've been waiting, and sort of this kind of pent up demand, what they've been hoping to do for months now. I think you could also potentially see that for the U.S. The Biden administration, I think, will want to lay down a moral marker to Israel and say, here's what we really believe. And that could take one of two forms. One might be a speech, whether it would be Secretary Blinken or President Biden. Sort of similar to the way President Clinton, when he was leaving office, set down the Clinton parameters, laid out his vision for peace. And second, if we look back to the end of Obama's presidency, in that period, again, between Election Day and when former President Trump took over the White House, he failed to veto a Security Council resolution condemning settlements. And that was the way that the United States was able to say that, here's what we really believe. We've been holding back, perhaps for domestic political reasons, but we're not going to leave without saying what we really think is appropriate going forward.
And Laura, before we let you go, a big question. Prime Minister Netanyahu hasn't specified what a post-war Gaza plan would look like. If we are talking about the prospect of an agreement in the coming weeks, we surely will have to have a concept of what that would look like.
Right, and I guess our first hint, which is surprising and somewhat troubling, is who he's appointed to be his ambassador to Washington. Ambassador Mike Herzog, who is seen as a moderate, will be leaving at the beginning of President Trump's term, and there is a new kind of very ideological, formerly American, but now an Israeli ambassador to Washington, who lived in Hebron and is very much pushing for settlements, not only settlements, but annexation of the West Bank. So that is concerning for moderates, both within the government and without.
All right, Laura, always good to have you on BBC News. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.